Let's see. So I want to start out with this is a pop quiz. Who has a good idea or in mind of a Bible story with a character that represents strength? If you got one of those, put them in the chat stream. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening with our new August series. So the new August series is called Spiritual Solutions in Fraught Times. And this morning, we're going to be looking at the spiritual ability or the spiritual faculty of strength and how it is that we can bring a greater sense of our own divine strength to the challenges or the situations that we face in these fraught times. I actually love the word fraught because it doesn't really say that it's a negative condition we're talking about. It says that there's certainly a lot of energy around it, but it gives us a chance to really come at it from both sides of that kind of parallax, from the positive and from the negative. How do we make sure that we're coming from a place of strength as we move into the different situations that arise in our lives? So let's see, Job, certainly. Job, strength of character. Esther, yes. I see all the women are going for the women that are expressing strength. I got one too I want to share a bit later that was kind of a new perspective for me that I want to share. The one that I thought would probably be most popular would be Samson was the example that I was kind of imagining that would be pretty commonly understood, a story that most of us knew. And the reason I wanted to start with Samson is because it is that masculine interpretation or that masculine expression of how often we think about strength, right? It's sort of a might out in the world. It's power that gets expressed outwardly and projected. That tends to be a lot of times how we bring strength to a situation, or at least maybe that's top of mind about what we think of strength when we think about how it is we apply it. But this morning, I really want to focus on inner strength, just like we had to sing about the inner light in each of us. Because it's that inner strength which really comes out of a more kind of feminine perspective or experience or expression that I think can be most effective, especially in these times when we need to be thoughtful and understanding and empathic in strong ways. So I think there's much for us to gain by really digging more deeply into maybe some of that feminine aspect of what strength looks like and what it means and how we apply it. And what I'm realizing is that even though I'm using terms masculine and feminine, it has nothing to do with gender or whether or not you're a man or a woman or whatever, however you identify in terms of sexuality. It's nothing to do with that. These qualities of strength that are either masculine or feminine, that I'm regarding as masculine and feminine, excuse me, are qualities that are within us all. And they're qualities that we all have the capacity to develop more deeply and more fully. So it's sort of like there's a yin yang to it, a wholeness instead of masculine and feminine, if that's a way to think of it for you that makes it more accessible, then yin yang, or just a sense of wholeness and completeness and being able to balance it in that way. So instead of really focusing on the story of Samson, who did this amazing, powerful things, he smited a whole group of Philistines with a jawbone of an ass. And he actually tore down a whole temple by pulling down the main pillars. I mean, all that physical demonstration of strength. And what I'm wanting to really look at is how that quality of inner strength is demonstrated. And I think the story I want to look at is one that comes out of the relationship, because we're looking at both sides of that, of Rachel and Jacob. You'll remember, and I'm going to sort of, for context, I'm going to start out with the Jacob story. You know, Jacob is the guy, the young infant who was born on the heels of his brother. He literally came out of the womb grabbing his brother Esau's heel. And later on in life, as we move through and there's a lot of drama in Jacob's story. As we move later on in life, he actually tricks their father, Isaac, into giving Jacob, the younger brother, because he was born second, the traditional blessing that would go to the elder brother. So he is very manipulative about that. He dresses up in an animal skin and tricks Isaac into giving him the blessing that was really Esau's due. And then, of course, he has to flee because Esau is so enraged that Jacob fears for his life. So he flees, and he's gone for many, many years. And in his travels, he lands at a space in which he met the woman of the love of his life, and that's where we meet Rachel. Jacob fell deeply in love with Rachel and wanted to marry her, But as things go, as karma kind of happens, when he went to talk to Rachel's father about permission to marry her, Rachel's father tricked him and actually married him off to the older daughter, whom Jacob really wasn't attracted to at all, but he was committed to it. And so Jacob spent the next 14 years earning the privilege, earning the blessing of the father to marry Rachel. So that's how deeply he loved Rachel. 14 years of sort of extra work so that he would be able to have the sister that he really wanted as his wife. So we're going to skip ahead now to a chapter later in their marriage. This is out of Genesis chapter 35, and it's verse 17. When she was in her hard labor, this is obviously Rachel is about to give birth. When she was in her hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not be afraid, for now you will have another son." As her soul was departing, for she died, she named him Benoni. But his father called him Benjamin. Interesting little comma, right? Her dying wish was to name her son Benoni, and Jacob was kind of like not going for it, and with just a comma changed her last, the wish that she spoke as her dying wish. So a couple interesting things. I want to do a little bit of biblical interpretation here, first on the names. Benoni, the name that Rachel gave to her son as he was crying his first cry coming into the world, and she was crying her last going out. So you can imagine what that must have been like for her, a deeply sort of painful moment, right? And what we find when we look at the word Benoni, in Hebrew, Ben means son. So son, and Oni actually means sorrow. So she's naming her son out of this last experience in her life, son of sorrow. Completely understandable, right? He's being born and she realizes that she's dying. She will never hold him. She will never nurse him. She will never raise him. She will never comfort him. She won't be able to celebrate him. So out of her pain and that experience, she has chosen this name, son of sorrow. Except, if you dig a little bit more deeply into the Hebrew, there is another definition for sorrow that I find really profoundly powerful. So sorrow, in addition to meaning sorrow, also means strength. If you think about that, I mean, in some ways they kind of feel antithetical, right? If we're in sorrow, strength. But if you think a little more deeply into your own life experience, imagine a time when you were in a fair amount of pain, when you were going through something really challenging. And on the other side of that, you found that there was this incredible strength that you developed, that you were able to stand in as a result of it. You know, maybe it was a loss of a job or a divorce or some disappointment. And as you move through that experience, what you discover is that you have a resiliency to stand strong in those places. If you think about some of the strongest people maybe that you have ever known in your life, I can bet you, I would guarantee that somewhere in their experience, they have been through an experience of great loss, some deep hardship that actually fortified them to be able to stand in truth, to stand in love in more powerful ways than they might have otherwise, or than they might have before that. And this week, I think we have a beautiful example of how that gets expressed, how that kind of strength gets expressed. And again, I love this example because it's a male example demonstrating this female quality, right? And that would be the life of John Lewis. I think I have a picture here. Originally, when I started sort of constructing this talk, I thought John Lewis was going to be the major focus of my talk. But what I realize is our nation has gone through this mourning and celebrating of this amazing, powerful activist that was in our US House of Representatives for 33 years. He was a disciple of Martin Luther King Jr. All of that is just a part of his legacy and the incredible strength that he has, that he brought to his life and his work. He was considered the consciousness of our House of Representatives, maybe of the entire federal government for that matter. And as you look at the story of his life, and what you realize is that it was born out of great hardship. Especially the pictures that we're all familiar with. He was one of the leaders of the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The first picture over there on the left side was taken about that time. And I know you've probably already seen on the news the pictures of him on his knees as they were beginning to kneel to pray, and the state troopers of Alabama began clubbing the marchers at that point. That's a really familiar. So you can imagine the sort of despair that must have been sort of evident in there, and yet what he stood in, the strength that he brought, was compassion and love and knowing that he was standing for something greater. That's such a beautiful expression, and I think dynamic, that happens when we embrace nonviolence. And he was a lifelong adherent of nonviolence. So I just wanted to share these two pictures of him as a young man when he was just getting started in his days of activism. And then later in life, these were pictures I hadn't seen in other places that I found in the New York Times. I'm not going to share more about his life because there is so much available. I will share some recommendations. If you haven't already, Amazon Prime has an amazing biography of him. I think you have to pay a little extra to see it, but well worth it, very complete. The other recommendation I would make is Krista Tippett has this podcast that's called On Being, and she interviews him. I think she interviewed him a while back, but she, as Krista is wont to, you can tell she gets a little impatient because he starts to repeat the stories that he so often has at political rallies, at stump speeches. And she pushes him a little bit to go more deeply into some memories that he hasn't talked about as much. So there's some new material on Krista Tippett's podcast On Being, if you want to hear more that maybe you haven't heard in other places. And the other recommendation I have, if you haven't already seen it, is President Obama's eulogy for him. It's about 40 minutes. You can get that on YouTube. It was posted this week. So if you want to know more about what strength looks like in terms of this beautiful inner strength, and more about sort of a life that demonstrated it magnificently, check out any of the videos of John Lewis. And I think just really move into a space of recognizing how we too have the capacity to bring that level of inner strength to the challenges that we might face in our own lives. So let's see, now we go back to the Genesis quote, right? We talked about Oni. Ben-Oni means son of sorrow or son of strength. And we know what we recognize is that as we move through sorrow, it actually is an opportunity for us to gain some resiliency, to gain some inner strength as we move through it. So now I want to move to Jacob, right? So Rachel has named this child after this kind of singular experience that was certainly dominant for her in that moment, right? But what we recognize is in Jacob is that he's having none of it. Jacob hears from the midwife that his wife has died, his beloved wife has died. So he certainly would have been in a fair amount of grief at that point as he's realizing that. And as she hands him his newborn son and tells him his wife's desire, her last breath, she spoke the name that she wanted him to have. And Jacob was like, nope, not going there, which in some ways feels like it might be dishonoring or disrespectful. But I think if we go to that next level, what we find is how it is that we move into a space of inner strength in our own situations of grief and loss. Yes? What that represents for us is the capacity that we have to name and claim our experience of any circumstance in our life. Others will try and name that for us. Others will try and give us labels. Others will tell us we're not good enough, we don't have the skills. Others have given us names in our lives. And yet what Jacob demonstrates is that we have the capacity to refuse those names and claim a deeper truth about what we want that experience to mean, about what we want our identities to be, what we know our identities to be. And we name those out of what we know to be our divine truth. So I want to share with you what the name that Jacob did choose is. So Benjamin, same, remember Ben means son, so it's son, but Jamin means something completely different. Jamin means right side, son of my right side is what he's saying, which sounds a little bit like nonsensical or confusing until we look back more deeply into the story of Jacob's birth. Remember that he had cheated his brother out of the blessing that was deserved of him as the older brother. Very likely what happened in that moment is that his father Isaac had blessed him with his right hand. The right hand in ancient Hebrew ritual represented power, the power to name, the power to bless, the power of authority. So that right hand, Jacob has been craving and trying to earn his whole life. And what he recognizes in this moment is that he has the power to name this experience. He has the power to name the son. And so he names it a blessing. Regardless of what his wife was experiencing in that moment, he has the capacity and the power to change the meaning that he holds around this, so that for the rest of his life, as he encounters and experiences the life and the growth of his own son, he recognizes that it's a blessing. Regardless of how it started, we can claim that a blessing. There's a couple pieces that came to me this morning that isn't in my notes, but I'm going to go ahead and share it. Because what I found in my own experience is that what frustrates my ability to name an experience very often is when I start to compare comparison kills the power to bless. It kills that power to name something. I shared last week that I had contracted COVID-19 and had been through kind of a healing process over much of July. I'm fine now. The symptoms were over pretty quickly. But what I found in the course of that is I moved through a very kind of despairing period. There were 3 or 4 days where I just was really in a dark place. And so I picked up, someone had given me Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and I picked that up. And what happened is I began to read of her incredible accomplishments, of all the overcoming that she's done in her life, as I was comparing my life to the accomplishments that she has. I was starting to compare, especially because she came from a very poor family on the South Side. She had so much more to overcome as a Black, as a female, as a woman in this culture. And so I'm starting to compare my accomplishments with hers. And in that comparison, guess which side of the line I fell on, right? So the despair just deepened. And what I recognize is that when I start to compare my life, then my ability to really claim the blessing isn't as powerful as it is if I'm simply coming from awareness of what's my business, what's mine to do, what's my life experience, and how am I going to bring that forward, right? Stick to my own business. So I needed to put that beloved book down, right? See, that's the other thing. We don't get to decide on the timing. We might claim something as a blessing. We can name it, and we know that it's done in spirit in the realm of the infinite. But it sometimes takes some processing and healing here in our human experience, that part of us that has to align with the divine, and we don't always get to choose that. So I put the book down and allowed myself to be more present to whatever the experience was, and as that passed, could come into a space of really being able to claim that there is a blessing for me to share in that illness. There may be a blessing for me to share publicly with others, so that there's a deeper empathy or compassion for those who might contract it, and maybe a deeper understanding for what it entails. So see, that's how it took some time, but I was able to sort of find that and name it as a blessing. Now, the other side of that is when, instead of comparing ourselves in that way in which we come up short, we look at somebody else's experience and we start to judge that. We start to name that. Oh my gosh, that is such a terrible experience. I don't know how they can ever overcome. We sort of buy into their victim experience. And we, in that mindset, we're limiting what their ability to name and claim a blessing might be. What we might see is just this terrible, awful experience. Someone else might be able to overcome that in a completely different way because they're not dealing from our framework. Does that make sense? So in that way, what I start to do is limit someone else's capacity to claim a blessing if I'm starting to judge them as in these dire circumstances that I can't imagine myself overcoming. That is none of my business. How someone else is going to experience something or move something or claim something is none of my business. So it's not up to me to decide what they can claim a blessing. It's not up to me to, and certainly it is up to me to bring compassion and empathy. It's also not up to me to go tell them that, oh, there's a blessing in this experience, right? That is none of my business. So when we start to see ourselves judging and comparing different levels of experience, this is a practice that really applies only to our own journey. If we're starting to label someone else's experience as something really great, probably there's some monkey mind going on here that's really about me not wanting to do the work to claim something that I'm finding challenging as a blessing myself, right? Because if I can make an excuse for that, you know, that really isn't a blessing. That's a horrible, awful thing that I don't know how anybody can overcome. What I'm doing is claiming that as an aspect of my own belief, right? I'm limiting my own capacity to claim blessing. And my ego is sort of coming in and rationalizing why it is that I don't have to do that work. So I would invite you to be very, very, very mindful of when, in your experience of moving through a fraught time, you're starting to compare your experience either to someone who you think might be at a higher level than you or someone who might be coming from a more challenging energy. Stay clear of those experiences. And here's how I would recommend doing that. It's the one that I used. It takes a level of observing, right? You have to know that you're in that place of starting to compare. And so once you recognize that thought, you just say, next. The thought arises, I'm comparing, I'm not feeling as good as myself, this just next. What's the next thought? Just let it go and move into the next phase of mind. I found that to be a really powerful tool as I move into space of really being able to claim the blessings that I know inherent are in the sorrows and in the challenges that each of us faces in our own lives. So what I'd like to do now is prepare for a time of meditation. And so as we rest in this moment of peace and strength, simply allow yourself to become more fully present to whatever you might be thinking and feeling in this moment. And whatever it is, just invite next. See if as we release the thoughts that arise, we can't come into a space of even greater presence. It's in the times of experiencing presence when we're most accessible to the divine, when we are most able to bring forth the strength that will fortify us to move through any experience in life with great clarity about what is true, about what is just, about what is empathic, and about what is love. This inner awareness gets grounded in our consciousness in these times of quiet reflection. And we know and trust that as we move out into a broader experience of our earthly life, that those qualities and the strength to stand for them are within us. So I invite you now, as we move into just a brief moment of silence, to simply rest in this awareness of presence and allow a spirit to do its mighty work, strengthifying and fortifying at every level of being. Know your inner strength as we rest in silence now. And very gently now, as we begin to return our attention to the sounds or the sights around us, I invite you to hold this awareness of presence, hold this awareness of your inner strength as you extend a prayer and a blessing outward to everyone who's sharing in this time of celebration and worship, knowing that collectively we are creating a wonderful energy that brings forth a greater capacity for each of us to express peace and justice and love and compassion and empathy with a great sense of our own inner strength. And we know and trust that in that desire, as we allow that same energy to just flow out, to touch all those whom our lives touch and even beyond, we hope to create that same sense and power of standing in truth in an energetic field that can uplift and touch the world. So it is, and so we let it be. Amen.
As I have thought it, so it shall be. As I have thought it, so it shall be.
Thank you, BA, and thank you, Reverend Kurt, for that really poignant message. And I love the fact that, we never prepare these ahead of time in terms of the Well, I don't know what Reverend Kurt is going to say, and he doesn't know what I'll say. We just know the topic. But I love how there's such incredible energetic synergy, because a lot of the things that, I thought about or will speak on are really drawing out from what he's talked about. So the concept of the inner and outer strength, the concept of how we think about that from both a divine masculine and a divine feminine perspective, and the notion that Aziz talks about how all of this matters, because we're limiting our understanding of strength, we're limiting our capacity to see strength, we're limiting our capacity to experience strength in a deeper way if we don't fully embody that wholeness about the ways in which strength lives and moves and breathes in our lives. And so when I was thinking about what I was going to say, I automatically thought of the 12 powers, because we're going to kick it old school right today, and I'm going to go old school and talk about Charles Fillmore and the 12 powers. It's one of the 12 powers. When he's talking about the idea of strength, he says it's really the ability to be persistent, to persevere, or the ability to just inhabit a space of stability or steadfastness. And it's also where we withstand temptation, or we have this capacity to accomplish. But he also talks about strength as this idea that is born in the silence. And I was really pondering about that. And I think that fits so nicely into what Reverend Kurt is talking about here today, that, we have this idea of strength as like this brute strength, right? This kind of outward thing. And we don't always think about the subtle ways that strength really is manifesting in our lives and around us. And it hit me this week with this example, with the contrast between my grandmother and my mother. Growing up, my grandmother was she was like a fierce granny. She was this, to me, I see her, and even my siblings, when they talk about her, she was like this badass. You didn't mess with her. She was outspoken, she was straightforward, she had a sharp tongue, she would cut you down like nobody's business. And if you mess with her grandkids, oh my God, she was like Mama Bear. She would tear you up, gut you from, gut you for sure. And so we have those memories of her. I have those memories of her, of just being this absolute pillar of strength. And the unfortunate part was, I just realized this week that that idea overshadowed my ability to see my mother's strength. I always saw her as this beautiful woman of compassion and this beautiful woman of kindness, but I never thought about it necessarily as embodying strength. And so as I sat back this week, I thought about the fact that, she was a single mom raising 3 kids. She, did so many things to be able to daily just live and breathe and be in her authenticity and be in her truth, but she didn't necessarily was like flashy about it. She wasn't necessarily the person to speak up. She's actually very shy and very quiet. But it was, again, as Fillmore says, in that silence that her strength really so beautifully came through. And I saw it this week when I took her to her acupuncturist appointment. And that's kind of where it all just hit me. And she's 87 years old, and she decided that she would start doing Eastern treatments and more holistic medicine. And so I've seen her evolve into this super advocate of Eastern medicine, and the way she talks when she went to her Western doctor, who said, he just doesn't understand. He doesn't know the power of the Eastern spiritual tradition, And just to see her talk this way and to grow in that, just to me, again, is one of these ways of strength that we can sort of move and live in a new way of being, even when we are what we think of as past our prime. She had an experience with her Western doctor who totally dismissed her, which often happens, not just as a woman, but certainly as an elderly person, where we're no longer useful if we're elderly. That's an unfortunate part of our culture. But she took that and decided to write out this letter to the doctor, who she felt really belittled her. And she was so proud of this letter that she wrote. I don't know if she's going to send it to him or post a formal complaint, but the fact that she would do that again just speaks volumes to this idea of just that silent strength. And she had, even in this week, started to do yoga, which she had never done before, and do meditation. And so I'm just so proud of her. So I got to send a shout out to my mom this week and just say, that, you know, we embody strength in so many different ways. And like Reverend Kurt was saying, if we don't see that beauty and that wholeness and those other ways of being strengthened, we are actually limiting people's blessings. We are curtailing their ability to be able to move into their strength if we have this idea that strength can only be one way. And by that same token, we limit our own ability to see the strength in ourselves if we think about strength from a very limited capacity. So it's really about expanding this week, expanding our notion of what strength really means and is to us and how we've embodied it in our own lives. So I'll go again, the 12 powers, you know, just in terms of really practical things we can do this week. You know, we learned that in the 12 powers that strength, the symbol is green, spring green. So see it, visualize it, experience it in your life this week. Spring green, how can that be a symbol of strength, of growing that inner strength that is really your natural, eternal, given power? You know, apostle is Andrew, that is the symbol for strength. So maybe doing some kind of meditation or readings or what have you around that. And the location for strength is the small of the back. So again, maybe giving some extra love to the small of your back, doing some stretches for your small of your back, doing some meditation or visualization where you see this gorgeous light energy flowing out and within from the small of your back. So all of these things we can do this week to really just grow that. But the most important thing we can do is just really see and think about the ways and feel into the ways that we can grow strength and how we've limited that. So I'll give you just, in addition to those things, a couple questions you can ask yourself. You know, is there someone in your life that maybe you haven't seen them as examples of strength? Who do you want to give a shout out to this week that you can say, yes, that is strength. You have inspired me with your story of strength. And so sharing that with them, that might be one way. You know, when we think about also the resistance, I love that Reverend Kurt talked about John Lewis as this idea of really non-resistance. That was part of what he was embodying non-resistance. And Fillmore says as well in the 12 powers that really that's the ultimate, that the ultimate way of understanding strength is non-resistance, that is the highest expression of strength. So what ways this week can you think about how you might be resisting in your life and how you can let that resistance go to embody your strength? And then maybe do some thoughts about what periods in your life you didn't feel strong, and really do some work around that and thinking about what that felt like and meant and what stories you were creating in your life, in your mind, in your heart about what that meant. And by the same token, stories in your life where you did feel strong. Remember those. Remember what it felt like. Remember where maybe in your body it really felt present, where in your life the joy that you felt, the pride that you felt, whatever it was that you felt, just allow those to just wash over you and create this energetic resonance for you that you can then connect to and continue to expand. So play with the idea this week, y'all. Play with the idea of strength this week and see what you got, and send us some messaging over Facebook in the group, or even to myself or Reverend Kurt, because we'd love to hear what you're doing this week with strength. Have a great week, everyone.
Hey, thanks for watching this YouTube video. If Unity's message of positive spiritual living resonates with you, I hope you'll subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date on other lessons as we post them. Also, if you're able to support us financially in the work that we do in the world, please check below for contact information. You can visit our website, find more about what programming we offer, as well as how to give. Blessings.